Welcome, Hoosier fans, to this week's edition of Assembly Call Radio, where each week we discuss the most interesting topics in the world of Indiana basketball. This is our 169th episode of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 622nd episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of Thursday, May 14th, 2020. I'm your host, Andy Bottoms, and let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment. In this one, for me, obviously slim pickings on the news wire about anything IU or even largely college basketball related. But there was a tweet that Jerod Davis sent out on Sunday that really struck me. I know Ryan talked about Devontae's graduation last week, and so we're going back to the well. But I just thought this was cool. His tweet was, "Why did I just find out I'm the first man in my family to graduate from college?" Kind of a cool thing. In some ways, cool that he didn't know and found that out on the weekend of his graduation. But really just a way for us to say congrats to Duran on not only graduating and what that means to him, but also what that means to his family. Certainly a guy that we have followed through a number of injuries and a number of highlights over the course of his IU career. And, some things that have come up this week have talked about, having goals from a basketball perspective and goals from an educational perspective. And you give a lot of credit to him and the academic staff that's been there, both under Tom Crean and under Archie Miller, for all that they do for the players to get them through to really achieve something great. And like I said, just a really great accomplishment for Duran and his family. And just thought that tweet was cool and a good thing to look at in the offseason. So many students graduated over the weekend under odd circumstances, and Duran and Devontae were among them, and so and Adrian Chapman as well. So all those guys got to go through that, albeit not in the traditional way, but that doesn't lessen the accomplishment of graduating and what that will mean for them in their future as Indiana graduates. So congrats to Duran, congrats to the rest of the guys for that, and that is this week's banner moment. And now, let me introduce my esteemed co-host for this week's show. Jerod is not with us right now, though he may join later. As you may have heard, though, Ty Jerome did reply to one of Jerod's tweets recently, so he's been kind of insufferable, quite honestly, and has really struggled to form coherent thoughts and sentences. So we're giving him a little time off to just let that soak in and bask in the glory of that Ty Jerome tweet. But here with me this week, to my left, is the coach, Brian Tonsoni.
He remembers the days when a movie cost $1. Heaven help you if you ever decide to pop your collar. Play hard, but remember, fake hustle is a crime. He's the coach and it's Tonsoni time.
Coach, what's on your mind tonight?
The first thing on my mind is condolences out to Cam Wilson, IU wide receiver, who lost his mom tragically. She was shot and killed this past week, and then later on his dad was found deceased as well in another location. Just a horrible event, and it shows, the IU community, his community there in Columbus raised some money for expenses and funds, and it was good to see people rally around. And kudos to Coach Allen and the LEO mantle has been widely discussed, but it's times like that we need to remember that teams are brothers and sisters, and they are there for each other to help win games, but they're also there to help each other through trials and tribulations. And I'm sure the LEO nation is out helping Cam Wilson and his family as they go through this tremendously awful situation. We wish Cam nothing but the best. A couple other brief things. One, had a really good interaction with the IU ticket office today, renewing my football tickets as we were up in limbo with where everything's going and with sports, and they did a really nice job. And it reminds me that I don't always agree with everything that goes on in the athletic department and teams, but I am proud to be a graduate of Indiana because I think for the most part, Indiana does things and has people there that try to make things as smooth as possible. As far as basketball goes, I have some optimism as I'm putting together clips for the Coach's Corner shows in our community. You get to see some of the good that the players do, and I'm just banking on the fact that we need consistent play within games. We need consistent play from week to week to avoid some of the 4-game losing streaks. But there's a lot of players coming back, and if they make, the adjustments that we talked about last week, some of the questions, if they move forward, then this team is going to be highly competitive in a pretty good Big Ten next year. And the season can't get here soon enough for a lot of reasons. But for me, it's optimism on the growth of this basketball program.
And to my right,
analyzing players, finding every wrinkle. He hasn't ever hosted, never lifted a finger. He's got all the answers.
Well, let me quickly add just one thing about this.
Dude just interrupted his own jingle.
All right, Ryan, I have some idea of what your rant may be about, though I don't know if you intend to save that for later or just use this as like the on-ramp to what you want to rant about later. I'll see which way you want to go.
California's a freeway state. I'm looking at an on-ramp here. I think that, first of all, I want to say hi, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. Obviously, we're all dealing with the ongoing issues in our country, but I just wanted to say I hope everybody's doing great. It's been an okay week over here, so I hope you guys are all having a good week as well. I think that we're going to talk about, and I won't get into specifics yet, but what I would say is if you're a head coach and a player transfers from your university, the proper way to handle it, in my opinion, publicly, is to wish them well, say it was great having them on the roster, maybe point out some things that happened in their career that were positive, and maybe say, yeah, he's just looking for more playing time, blah, blah, blah. Just be completely bland about it and wish them well. That's all I can say. If that's going to happen to you, it's tough. Obviously, you put a lot of time into players and you create a family atmosphere and all that. It can be a blow to the ego when a guy wants to leave. But your position as a coach of a university, of a basketball program, just, wish the guy well and hope he does well and send him off into the world. There's no reason to air your dirty laundry on a radio show, even if the person who hosts that radio show is a big fan of this program.
All right. Well, with that, we'll circle back to that momentarily, at least part of that. So here's what we're going to talk about this week. We got a few Hoosier headlines. Then we want to talk about the Matt Painter comments about the transfers of Nogel Eastern and Matt Harms.
Oh, what did he have to say?
And general thoughts maybe on when it's okay for a coach to criticize an athlete publicly. We'll dip into that a little bit here in the first segment, and then we want to take an early look at the Big Ten. I know Jerod and Alex had Bart Torvik on podcast on the Brink not too long ago, and a handful of decisions still lingering out there, but just wanted to take an early look at the Big Ten. Try to look through that a bit, and then we'll answer your questions. So we've got all that coming up this week on Assembly Call Radio. Before we get to that, a few quick announcements. Please continue to support our friends at Home Field. You can go to homefieldapparel.com and use the code Assembly20 to get 20% off of your entire order. This week they released fleece sweatpants made out of the same material as the Bison hoodie, so I'm pretty sure there's already been a mad dash to get those. And as Jerod writes here, you can now literally drape yourself head to ankle in the most comfortable clothing material ever created. I'll also tell you it's getting close to graduation time. Our neighbor is going to Dayton, so as one of the gifts for him, we ordered a Dayton shirt from the fine folks at Home Field. So keep them in mind as you're thinking about gifts to give people and things like that. I can say with great certainty that our neighbors are Syracuse fans and Dayton fans, so they will not be listening to this program. So I don't think I just let that secret out of the bag there, but just an awesome source for great shirts. And if you want to support a local food bank, you can go to foodpantries.org or feedingamerica.org. The food pantry site will let you search for ones in your area if you want to localize wherever you might want to donate. You can find out more about that there. And then the feedingamerica.org is more of a nationwide one. But again, if you have the ability and the desire, those are a couple places you can go to help out with everything going on, as Ryan mentioned. So with that, Hoosier headlines. So we talked about the graduations, a couple changes to the net ranking system that Coach and I are dialed in on, probably more than is healthy for most. But in general, they're reducing the number of factors that fall into really just two. So there's an adjusted net efficiency piece that includes efficiency, strength of opponent, and the location of the game, home, road, or neutral, and then the team value index, which is more results oriented, and they want to try to reward teams who beat other good teams. So those are the two big pieces. And then they also adjusted the strength of schedule for those who are familiar with wins above bubble. This sounds an awful lot like that, but it basically it used to just kind of average winning percentages of opponents. This takes a better look. It considers opponent strength and site of each game, assigning each game a difficulty score, and then aggregating these across all games results in an overall expected win percentage versus a team schedule, which can be ranked to get a better message or better measure of the strength of schedule. So, Coach, I'll throw this to you. You feel like that's a good change as best you can tell? I know we'll be watching it from a bracketology perspective, but your thoughts on that and the fact that they've already made some changes.
I liked the net as compared to the RPI because I thought it took into factor how you played a little bit, but that can be gamed just as well. And I thought it was a little bit last year. Some of the teams, Texas Tech and Stanford, their resumes didn't match up to where their net was. So I applaud the NCAA in making an adjustment. I just want to see what it's going to look like eventually, if it's going to be more of a true measure. But I did think the net produced better results other than a few outliers. I'm hoping this takes those outliers out of play a little bit and is a little more fair to the resume. Because I didn't think Texas Tech was where they should have been, and Stanford and some of those teams. But any metric you can game if you're smart enough and pay attention to it with your scheduling and how the outcomes of games. So I think it's a good thing for college basketball overall to always try to have the best measure to get the best 68 teams.
Yeah, I like the fact that they're looking at it, trying to make improvements. There were a lot of those outliers. I think some of those outliers show themselves pretty early in the when they initially release it, and really played there throughout. So I think you're inherently going to have that. They continue to try to mix predictive measures with results-based ones, and so I think that inherently will produce a little bit of confusion or some oddities. But I'm like you. Hopefully, it reduces some of the outliers where the numbers don't really match up. Arizona was the one that really stood out a year ago, so we'll kind of sit back and wait and see what happens with that. Trace Jackson Davis, potential number change. It sounds like he had tweeted something out. He wore number 23 in high school. With Demezi transferring, that opens back up and then would allow Christian Lander to wear number 4. So I think we can assume that to happen, although there's nothing quite official there. And then a couple changes to the calendar from the NCAA. They announced on Monday it'll extend the current recruiting dead period through Tuesday, June 30th. Due to the pandemic, and then the deadline for student athletes to withdraw from the NBA draft and retain eligibility pushed back from the current June 3rd date. They don't have a final date set because they don't know what's going to happen with the NBA draft, so they'll kind of work things in there. It does affect Justin Smith. Indications are that he'll ultimately return, but he's the one guy in there. Ryan, anything of note from the schedule changes or the calendar changes from your standpoint?
No, it was the right thing to do. I mean, you've got to move back the recruiting dead period because guys aren't, out. The whole calendar is changing, so it's worth extending that. And then I think the draft date, again, same thing. It's these kids don't have answers yet, and so making them decide on something in a few weeks when they've had absolutely no feedback is not fair. And so I think what we will see, we'll see a lot of those fringe guys that sometimes jump return. And because there's just far less certainty on the draft, I think we might see a lot of high upside guys wind up coming back as well. And because I think teams, instead of having individual workouts, are going to have to base a lot of their assumptions on tape as opposed to individual workouts where guys are like, did you see what he can do with the ball in his hands? It's going to be more based on film. And we saw that with the NFL draft. A lot of guys who had played very well in college wound up getting drafted higher. A lot of boards stayed pretty much chalk, whereas on one of my buddy's boards, 25 of the first round, 25 of his top 30 guys went. And he bases his board heavily on performance, and so you saw guys who performed well taken early, as opposed to a wide receiver from a small school or a wide receiver from I don't want to say small school, but a middle of the road school who has ridiculous athleticism didn't jump up 30 spots because somebody fell in love with them because they didn't have a chance to work them out. So I think that same thing is going to happen with this draft. And I think you're going to see a lot of guys wind up coming back.
All right, so we'll hit this Matt Painter topic. We talked about circling back to that. I'll let Coach probably chime in first. I think most people have heard this or read about this in some form or fashion. Painter had some comments about the transfers of Nogel Eastern and Matt Harms. a number of comments during the interview with Dan Dockage were relative to their work ethic and different things like that, which I think is one of the things we'd all agree is really part of the DNA of the program that Painter has built from a work ethic standpoint, things like that. So we talked a lot about that. Talked about you guys handling adversity and are they putting themselves in a better situation basketball wise and different things like that. I would encourage you, because I did both. I did this in the order of I read comments either on Twitter or read an article about what the comments said, and then I went back and I actually listened to the full interview, which I felt like in some cases gave me different impressions of how the words were said, the way in which they were delivered, different things like that. I mean, inherently reading a quote or something pulled out is going to be a little bit different. And I think we have some varied opinions, although Jerod and Ryan aired some of their thoughts on this on Twitter last night. But Coach, what were your overall thoughts? Were there parts that you, and I think you probably look at this a couple ways. One of it is probably as a coach, and one of it is probably as a, an analyst. So feel free to delineate your thoughts between those two avenues.
Well, both sides of the party have decisions to make and things that they think about the decisions. And decisions can be good decisions for a player, bad decisions for a coach, but it's how you handle it that really matters. And in the college game, I think you really have to be PR aware of what you're saying at any time, because recruiting is such a tough business. I don't believe in negative recruiting, but a lot of places will bring up certain things. If you give a little bit of ground by some of your comments or attitudes, that might potentially be used against you. So you got to be really careful. What I gathered from the quotes, I read them. I did not listen to them because I don't listen to certain shows anymore. That's just a moral ground that I take. But listening to the quotes, it's a coach who was upset and rightfully upset and had good meaning. I think Coach Painter means well. He likes people to come play for the name on the front of the jersey, not the name on the back. He believes that you have to work hard to get what you earn. Those are really noble things. I applaud that. That's part of the reason why I like Coach Painter. And some of those things came into play and maybe why these guys left that didn't meet his expectations. But when you go on a radio show, you are best to follow Ryan's advice in his opening comments. You're not going to make the changes. And I know that some people say he's defending what he believes his program is. That's all good and well, but it's better to let that go and stay positive. And I know we deal with that at the high school. You have a freshman kid you're counting on playing as a sophomore varsity. He doesn't want to come out because he wants to be in another sport predominantly. Or, you have a kid who decides he wants to transfer schools because of playing time. That happens in my programs, in the program that I'm in now. We will stay quiet and we will stay positive. We are not going to publicly make any statements. We're not going to beg players to stay. We're not going to beg players to come back. Everything's going to be done professionally, quiet, and even if we're mad as heck in the locker room, and there have been some situations in the 20 years that I've coached where you're really mad at the way a parent has portrayed things or the way a player is saying things, but it's just best to in my opinion follow what Ryan said and keep it quiet and go about replacing the players that left, because I think it just opens up this huge discussion that really didn't need to be happening about a guy who obviously does a good job.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I was probably maybe more okay with it than the two of you, and maybe more aligned with what Jerod said. I definitely get it from people can use it against you. I don't know if it reflects well, but I also think there's people who like that, and that may make him more endearing to them as a potential landing spot because you kind of know what you're going to get. At no point during the conversation did I get the impression that these weren't the exact same conversations that he had with those two guys. It came out today. I guess I should have said this in the beginning too, that Nojel Eastern already committed to Michigan. Pretty quick turnaround. I'll leave it at that.
Had to know that.
He had to know. And I think that's part of it. I do think that played a role. I would be surprised if he didn't know at that point. I thought it would be one thing if it was just a, commentary on kids today, stuff like that. I think it became like it felt more personal because it was obviously addressed about those two guys. But the college basketball fan in me kind of found it refreshing that somebody was that willing to talk openly about his thoughts and what the challenges were with those players, because that's not a side of things you usually hear. It usually is what Ryan said. It's everything's kind of flowery. Thank you for your contributions. When in a lot of cases, yeah, that's fine. It's a mutual decision and it's best for both parties. But there's some things underlying that. And I kind of just felt like he was right or wrong, kind of doubling down on how he runs the program, and a guy who's been somewhere long enough where he's comfortable enough to do that he's not worried about it. And it's also a place where he went to school and played. And I think there's a little bit different slant to it that way when it's your alma mater and you've been through that. And he, kind of talked about some of his experience as a player, and hey, I wasn't scoring, but it was because there were different reasons for that, he didn't try to blame other people. So I kind of see both sides of it. I didn't mind it. But I certainly see how people could use it to say, hey, is this really a guy that you want to go play for? Cause he's going to go trash you somewhere after the fact. So Ryan, we only got a minute or so left in this segment, and I know you probably have
That's definitely not enough time.
Additional thoughts, but chime in a little bit, and then we can maybe talk a little bit more during the break.
I'll make it very simple. Always take the high road. Always. Especially if you're a public figure and the face of a program, or really the forward face of the university at times is the basketball coach at Purdue, just like at Indiana. You always take the high road. And this was not the high road, in my opinion. And you said there were some conversations he almost certainly had with those players behind the scenes. Leave it behind the scenes. You wish them well. And I get that he had to go because two rising seniors who are going to be your leaders next year, who in all likelihood would have been named captains, leave in a few weeks from each other. You got to address that. You go on the show, you say, hey, we're fine. These are two guys. They wanted to move on for more playing time. We've got some young guys coming up that really are going to push them and have really earned their spot. And it was just going to be, a situation where they weren't going to get much playing time. Yet we weren't going to maybe not get as much playing time. They want to go seek something else out. They want to grow somewhere else. We wish them well. That's all you have to say. And people be like, oh, all right. Sounds like they got a good backcourt situation. They didn't really need Nogel Eastern. They've got a solid front court. Matt Harms, bummer he's leaving, but he graduated. And, that's all you have to say. Instead, he went down into this whole long thing. And I agree, it was different when I listened to it than when I read it, but I still felt the same way. Saying that you're not a Boilermaker unless you finish. Things like that, that's just a petty cheap shot he took at these guys on the way out the door. You want to address that to them behind the scenes. You have absolutely every right to in your personal relationship with those people. But it felt like he was trying to trash those kids on the way out the door as a way of saying, we're fine without them. And I didn't appreciate that. I don't care what Matt Painter says in general. He is Purdue's coach. I'm not really concerned with Purdue. I know Jerod loves him and loves the way he runs his program. I get it. I respect the way he runs his program. But just because you like somebody or don't or respect the way they run their program doesn't mean they're infallible. And I think he made a mistake. And quite frankly, I think in a month, Matt Painter's going to look back at that and think he made a mistake because it didn't look good. It looked like he was being petty because he learned that one of the guys he was counting on to be a senior defensive stopper transferred to a rival. And that is the wrong way to handle it. Make Nogel Eastern look bad for leaving Purdue for a rival. Don't go out there and then trash the kid. And so that was my feeling on it. I know I went over a minute. I apologize. It's just how I work. But I would say that, yeah, that's my feeling.
I think the challenges in some of that is a couple things. One, those two guys have played a lot. They had started, Harms lost some playing time when they realized they couldn't play him with Travion Williams, but he was going to play a lot. I think you could see the writing on the wall that maybe they weren't going to play as much this year. But that being said, I think the other part is I don't know if he looks back and regrets it because the people that really ate it up in large part were a lot of Purdue fans who had probably been frustrated, certainly by Eastern, maybe less so by Harms, but I think had a bad taste in their mouth. So they liked it, for lack of a better term.
And quite frankly, with the playing time comments, they want to be like, or the work ethic comments, be like, oh, that's why he left. He didn't want to work hard. That's the way fans are. So of course, Purdue fans were going to love it.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying. So he's not alienating people who are generally supportive of him. The biggest potential for me is alienating potential recruits. But I don't know that the type of guy, and Jerod had this so I won't attribute this to my own thought, but the types of guys that they are typically going to get are the guys who feel like they're going to outwork somebody because they weren't ranked high enough or they weren't as high ranked. And so maybe it doesn't hurt that much. Like that to me is if there's an argument to be made where it hurts somewhere, it's more on the recruiting side. But who's to say? I mean, we'll see about that. So anyway, all right. So I let you go over a minute, and then I talk for a while too. So we're all
we'll be forgiven eventually.
We're all in this together. All right. Coming up, we are going to talk about the Big Ten and not just Purdue. So we'll hit that next after the break. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call.
This is Jordan Halls, and I never miss a shot or an episode of the Assembly Call.
And welcome back to the Assembly Call. You can find all of our content at our website, assemblycall.com. And if you ever want to join the chat mob during our unedited live broadcast or watch those replays and see all the between-segment banter, like the extended discussion we just had on the Matt Painter conversation, then check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/assemblycall. I'm Andy Bottoms here with Ryan Phillips and the coach Brian Tonsoni, and we want to take this opportunity to take a quick look around the Big Ten, few comings and goings, I guess, and then look through at least early thoughts on maybe what the tiers of the league look like. So in terms of NBA draft decisions, the guys expected to stay in at this point, based on anything I've read and heard, would be Jalen Smith, Daniel Oturu, Caleb Weston, Ayo Dosunmu, and I think Xavier Tillman. I lumped him in this category. And then those expected to return of note, you've got Luka Garza, Kofi Coburn, Marcus Carr at Minnesota, Isaiah Livers at Michigan, Aaron Henry has his name from Michigan State, Justin Smith we talked about already, and I think there was another guy or two that may have their name in there. I think CJ Walker from Ohio State potentially. So we're kind of using those as the backdrop of this based on conversations that we've had. So if you look at some of the early top 25 rankings that are out there, and even the Podcast on the Brink episode that I mentioned, kind of top tier feels like Wisconsin, Michigan State, and Iowa. So let's kind of talk through those first. Ryan, you love Wisconsin, so I'll throw this to you first. So the way that Jerod phrased this question is the team with the fewest question marks, Wisconsin, talented enough to win the Big Ten. So they only lost Brevin Pritzel. They've got 5 seniors back that look to be their starting lineup. So is Wisconsin, in your eyes, the clear favorite based on how they performed later in the season last year and what they've got coming back?
Yeah. I mean, I think they have to be, just because the returning roster is stronger. Now you and look, with freshmen and new, players coming in, you never know how the fit's going to work. You never know how quickly they're going to get adapted. So you have to always lean toward the team that's returning the best, unless they're getting a 5-star, elite guy that's a game changer. I think that you have to default to the team that's returning the best roster that you seen play in the Big Ten. And given Wisconsin's system, they tend to do better when they have a bunch of veteran guys. So I would say that Wisconsin's the early favorite. Does that mean they win the league? Who knows? We don't know how it's going to play out, but early favorite for sure, I'd say.
Yeah, to me, they have the fewest question marks at the very least, and we'll get into some of the questions about everybody else. And that was, you've got senior guards in Davison and Trice. You've got Reavers and Micah Potter. Now, maybe you've got questions about how much those two can play together, but I think they're going to make every effort to play them together based on who else they've got. So you do have a couple other role guys back. They have a top 100 freshman in that system. Freshmen don't tend to play a ton, or at least contribute a ton right away. So they feel like the favorite to me. Coach, lingering thoughts on Wisconsin for you?
Well, I think with all of this, what I look is who's poised to maybe take a step back from where they're projected, and who's going to take steps forward. I think Wisconsin's going to be a top-tier team, whether that's 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it'd be really hard to envision them with the returning players and the success that they've had. What they have going for them is the program and how they run their stuff, and they have guys coming back. What could help them drop a little bit is they're always susceptible to teams with great athleticism and can outplay them. They're not. They need the system win, and sometimes they just eke out games. They won 7 or 8 in a row down the stretch to win. They didn't look like real world beaters at IU the last time and eked out a 58-54 win. All of a sudden you lose a couple of those, or breaks go bad. That's enough to maybe, keep you from winning the championship, maybe be, 3 or 4 and drop down a notch. But yeah, they look good off the bat, and a team that everyone will be shooting for.
So the other two teams up toward the top will be Michigan State and Iowa. So we'll hit Iowa first. Defense, obviously, the question mark with them. if Garza comes back, they really only lose Ryan Kreiner, and Cordell Pemsel, I think, is transferring, but that's not a huge one. They get Bohannon back from injury, and then you've still got Wieskamp, CJ Frederick, Connor McCaffrey, a lot of the same cast of characters as they have. They've got a handful of freshmen. I don't think anybody to be asked to step in and contribute right away. So stat in here from 2013 to 2016, Iowa's defense averaged 41 in KenPom. If they get anywhere close to that with an elite offense, how good could they be? So, Coach, I'll go to you first on Iowa, and maybe the question is better phrased as: do you think they can improve enough defensively to really be a contender?
I mean, I think they're going to be a contender. I think they're going to make the NCAA tournament. They just have too much firepower. And Garza is just a tough guard, inside, outside, and he's really worked well to the angles that he plays. So I think anytime you can score points, you can run into a streak of victories. But when you can't guard, you can also run into some games that you lose that you shouldn't. And in order to win the Big Ten, you need to be consistent on both sides, or as consistent as you possibly can. And I just don't trust Iowa putting together enough over a 20-game schedule to win the Big Ten. But I do think, I think they're one of those teams that's poised to drop. And I always go back to the Northwestern and Minnesota a couple years back after Northwestern made the tournament and had all 5 starters coming back, and everyone projected them in the top 3 or 4, and they fell down along with Minnesota. Iowa, to me, would be a team that should be in the top 3 and looks like a top 3 team. Wouldn't be surprised if they fell to the middle of the pack because of the defense.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges with them is, and something that Kreiner brought, he was a little bit of an instigator when he was out there, but he did give them a little bit more size. They really don't have a lot established outside of Garza inside, so they may start playing even smaller than they did at times a year ago. So then Michigan State. So Ryan, I'll come to you on them. If you assume that Xavier Tillman is gone, and really even if you don't, I think the big question for them is point guard. And that would be a big question losing Cassius Winston no matter what. But it's really, Foster Loyer is the only guy who's really played that position. Do you move Rocket Watts over to that? Because the highest rated freshman guard they have coming in is more of a combo guard based on what I looked at. Josh Langford, not really sure if he's going to try to get another year of eligibility. So you really don't have a ton of options there. Maybe it's moving Watts over, but how do you think they answer that question? Can they answer that question? Is putting them in the top tier really just banking on Izzo being Izzo more so than actually knowing that all the pieces fit together very well?
Well, they have talent. I mean, they have enough talent to be in a top tier team. It's just a question of how it all fits together. You add Joey Hauser. I mean, I think he was a guy who, had they played last year, they would have been even better. I mean, he would have made them a lot better. If Tillman leaves, you still have so much talent, especially if Langford comes back. I mean, Langford, I have some friends who are Michigan State fans and alums and said that Langford was their best player and they lost him for the whole season and they were still really good. I don't know what they're going to do at point guard. I truly don't have the answer. I think there's a chance Rocket Watts gets an opportunity. They might do it by committee. Izzo has done that before and it's worked. You might have guys bring up the ball who are more of wings and sort of initiate the offense from there. He's not afraid to do stuff like that. So it'll be interesting. I'm sure by midseason they'll have that figured out. It might take some time. It might be ugly early because anytime you lose a guy like Cassius Winston and potentially Tillman as well, you've got to do some reworking of your lineup and of your roster. So Winston's been there for so long that it was his team for several years, and so there's going to be a changing of a guard. I think it's going to be ugly to begin with. But I also think that it's a program that tends to figure itself out as the season goes along. More years than not, they're getting better as the season goes along, as opposed to facing setbacks. So I think that they're going to figure it out. I think it's going to be fine. I don't have the answer of what they're going to do, but I just trust everybody who's in that program to figure it out and get better as the season goes on. They always do.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. One of the things you brought up, you go back to Denzel Valentine, a bigger guy that initiated the offense a lot just based on his skill set. Can they find somebody else to do that as a replacement? I cannot see them. I cannot see them playing Foster Loyer extended minutes at the point. But stranger things have happened, but that seems highly, highly suspect and highly unlikely. All right, so the next tier, as I grouped it together, I think IU falls in. Hopefully we don't say that too overly optimistically. You've got Rutgers, who I didn't really have anything about. They have almost everybody back. Obviously, questions about whether they can win on the road. But the ones that have the biggest question marks in this tier are Ohio State and Michigan. Ohio State, they've got a ton of transfers that they're trying to bring in. They had a lot of roster turnover. If you assume that Caleb Wesson is gone, Andre Wesson has graduated. So you're really relying a lot on transfers. They've got a guy, Justice Suing, who came from Cal. He sat out last year, averaged 14 points a game, didn't shoot it all that well on a couple pretty bad Cal teams. You get Seth Towns from Harvard, who was a really sought-after transfer. He's had a lot of injury issues, hasn't played a whole lot over the last couple of years. And you bring in Abel Porter, who's really more of a probably backup point guard type guy from Utah State. So those are really the questions. You've got to integrate those guys with Dwayne Washington, C.J. Walker, Kyle Young, E.J. Liddell, Musa Jallow sat out last year. So there's some interesting pieces there, but not a lot that played together a year ago. So, Coach, how does Holtman, he's got a good track record, so it's easy to believe that he's going to fit these pieces together, but also hard not to believe that there's going to be some growing pains with all these transfers and new faces for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, and he's got good players there, but who's going to be his closer? He's been there 3 years, and he had, Kate's Diop, whatever that dude's name was, who was played out of his mind his first year. And then he had the Wesson brothers for a couple of years. Yeah. Then, he's got a lot of players and some transfers. How do you fix that in? To me, that just is again, a middle tier NCAA tournament team can be, because Holtman's a really quality coach and he's been there now in year 4. So you see some advances for the players, CJ Walker and those players. And there's been some interesting discussion on other podcasts between who do you trust, Ohio State or Michigan, a little bit more. I'm leaning a little bit more towards Michigan because of Wagner and Livers coming back if they do. Now, if Wesson comes back, I think that's a boost for Ohio State. I don't see them cracking the top tier, but they can be pretty productive. I would expect them in the NCAA.
Yeah, so Michigan, I'll just kind of shoehorn them in here as well, because they're the other one to me that's a little bit hard to figure out. Livers, by most accounts, is going to come back. You got Wagner coming back. Eli Brooks is in the backcourt, and Brandon Johns. Those are kind of the key returning guys.
They lose so much, though.
They lose. I mean, yeah, losing Simpson and Teskey from a defensive standpoint is a big deal. Even DeJulius stood to get a lot more shots and transferred. And then you've got, so they had
They got hurt in recruiting, too.
Yeah, and then
Isaiah Todd.
Top recruit goes to the G League. So, yeah, that doesn't help. They've still got...
By the way, Isaiah Todd, I watched his film when he made that G League commitment. I was like, boy, I'm so glad he's not going to Michigan. That dude's a 5-star, super athletic power forward. He's skinny, but that dude's he could have wrecked some people in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I mean, they've still got 3 other top 100 guys, but a couple of those are on the back end of the top 100, so you don't know whether you're going to get much out of them right away. They've got a Columbia transfer at guard in Mike Smith, so they're relying a bit more on transfers and young players, new faces. I don't know how much we know about Juwan Howard anyway, but Ryan, if you had to, pick one of those two to I guess whichever way you want to think about it, either fall out of that second tier or maybe play above that, do you have a lean one way or the other since Coach said Michigan?
Just based on track record, I trust Ohio State more than Michigan. Their staff has proven they can do it. And Michigan, I mean, Juwan Howard might turn out to be a fantastic coach, but we've got one season of him, and he basically inherited a complete roster from John Beilein. So, it's just hard for me to pick Holtman's team to drop when Holtman has proven he can coach and develop players. Now, I think both teams lose a lot, and both teams, having a lot of new pieces they're going to have to factor in. So really it could go either way. I don't think I can say definitively. I just lean towards the guy who's coached in the Big Ten a couple years and kind of knows what he's doing. And
Howard can recruit fast.
He can. And that's the thing.
He signs guys like in 24 hours these days.
Yeah,
that's got to be impressive.
But here's the thing: the G League took one of them away. So But I think Howard's going to be a monster recruiter for Michigan. I think there's no question about that. He's shown that already. The question is just this: if we're talking just about this year, I would trust Ohio State a little bit more than Michigan, but that's just based on past experience.
Yeah. You make a good point because they're losing a lot, and they were just one game ahead of IU, 19 and 12 or something on the year, and they had that really great start. in the tournament.
Both Ohio State and Michigan started.
Yeah,
and Michigan started well.
So, but yeah, both those teams are a lot lower than what they were last year and finished, 7th, 8th, 9th area. I know Michigan was in a 8-9 against Rutgers. Rutgers will be interesting, too, to see if they can win on the road to move up from that 8th spot, that second tier. They have a lot of players coming back, too. And what does Illinois do? If both those guys come back from Illinois, look out for Illinois. If one of the two I think they can move up into this tier possibly.
Yeah, Illinois was the other team I wanted to touch on, and I struggled a little bit with putting the tiers together, and I even think that on Podcast on the Brink they probably had them mixed in with these others. They were a little bit.
It's so hard to do tiers this far out.
They're a little bit odd to me. I mean, I'm obviously assuming, like I said, that Desunmu is gone and Coburn is back, but they lost some other guys as well. Andres Feliz left, Alan Griffin transferred. Kipper Nichols graduated finally. They do have Trent Frazier. How he's still in school, I have no idea. They got Georgie. They got DeMonte Williams. I mean, those four would really be their core guys. And then they signed a couple guards as freshmen that are going to pretty much have to play right away. One of them ranked 31st as a shooting guard, Adam Miller, and then Andre Curbelo, who I think IU was somewhat involved with for a little while, a point guard who ranked 42nd. So 2 top 50 guards. But you're going to have to play pretty quick. They got another D3 guy who sat out last year. Maybe he comes in and can play well. They're the one that has a pretty wide range of outcomes. If the freshman guards are good, then I definitely think with with having Coburn inside, like they could move into that tier. You could probably make an argument that maybe they should be in that second tier already. But Coach, I know you were an ardent Desunmu supporter as your closer. So, how big a shoes is it to really fill with having that guy that you knew you give the ball to at the end, and he was willing to take the big shot and things like that, versus trying to figure out who on that roster becomes that guy going forward?
It's just huge, and I saw someone mentioned in the NBA where they thought he should come back. So that'll be interesting. I think he's gone, but he wasn't that much of a closer as a freshman. He was nice and he could play and he got some good stats. But his sophomore year, he wanted the ball in clutch time and he made some big shots for Illinois to win on the road. The Miller and Curbelo are going to fill that spot some, but I don't know. The one player you mentioned that I really loved in covering their games a few times for Delphi Bracketology was Feliz. And that's that senior piece who did everything. When he needed to score, he scored. When he needed to guard, he guarded and doesn't get a lot of fame. And that's hopefully where Indiana basketball is going. You get these guys who have been in the program for multiple years, can do multiple things when needed. But Feliz is going to be hard to replace, too, for Illinois.
So those are kind of the top ones I had in that other third tier. I had Purdue in there. There's a lot of, we talked a lot about roster turnover there. I do think they feel really good about some of the wings and guards that they have. Penn State will be interesting, losing Lamar Stevens. They've got a decent amount back. It's a question of, do you really trust Pat Chambers? Maryland loses a ton. And one of the things that was interesting that Torvik pointed out on that podcast was, while there's some guys coming back, they lose Cowan and Jalen Smith. Even some of the guys that they have coming back were fairly inefficient in supporting roles. So you don't really know, in a larger role, how do they get more efficient there? So Maryland is one that could drop a decent amount. And then you've got Minnesota, Northwestern, Nebraska. Nebraska is like a revolving door of transfers. I think Northwestern, Nebraska is still probably that bottom tier. Minnesota, depending upon what Carr does, may fall in there again as well. So that's kind of the way that it shakes out right now. I'm sure we'll have more discussion about this in the offseason. But Ryan, any parting thoughts from you, lingering Big Ten thoughts that you wanted to get in before we take a break?
I think that top tier is going to be pretty darn good. I think the second tier, there's a chance for Indiana. If everybody can sort of move their game forward, there's a real chance for Indiana to make a jump next year. Maybe into the back of the first tier. I mean, you never know what happens once you get into the season, but Indiana's got a lot of returners, a lot of continuity. They're adding some talent. I just think this is setting up to be a build year for Indiana, where they can take that big next step that maybe they've been looking for. I just think that there's so many guys leaving, so many guys transferring in and out, and there's going to be so many new players in key situations that it's an opportunity for Indiana with its continuity to finally take that jump that it's wanted to take under Archie Miller.
All right, well, that'll do it for our Big Ten thoughts on a season that may happen in some form or fashion. So coming up next, we'll answer your questions as we do every week. Stick with us here on the Assembly Call.
Nick Zeisloft. I never miss an open three, and I never miss an episode of The Assembly Call.
And welcome back to the Assembly Call. I'm Andy Bottoms here with Ryan Phillips and the coach Brian Tonsoni. And remember, you need to be subscribed to our email newsletter. We send out a weekly IU news roundup, even during the offseason, and after every game, we send out a detailed post-game analysis. Just text IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. That's IU to 66866 or go to assemblycall.com. It's now time for our mailbag. All questions were submitted via our private IU basketball discussion community, which you can learn more about at assemblycall.com/community. So piggybacking on our discussion that we just had, we did have a question from Jay, although he did not submit it through the community, of course, because why wouldn't he? Because it's this.
It's not that good, but it's not that bad. It's Jay's mediocre question.
All right, so at the risk of getting into additional Purdue talk, Jay's question was, which Big Ten teams have had the best and worst offseason? So we'll just do one each. Coach, who's had the best offseason in the Big Ten that you can, from your standpoint?
All right, it's been Indiana. We need to talk Indiana. You know, no one's really left that we didn't know about. Demezi left on good terms, hopefully. And Christian Lander, that wasn't really an offseason, but it's close with the COVID. So Indiana has very little question marks at this point, and so I'm going to go Indiana.
Ryan, what about you?
Of course I'm going with Indiana. I think that adding some extra guys, you get the Christian Lander reclassify, which appears it's still coming. So, I think that's the big one, is that you've got a 5-star top point guard in the country coming, that you win on that. So I would say IU, plus only losing one player, getting all those freshmen coming in, a lot of continuity around the program moving into next year. I would say Indiana's at the best one.
Yeah, I would. I'll make that a clean sweep. I think just in terms of additions to the program and lack of subtractions, that feels like the answer. All right, who had the worst? Ryan, I'll go to you first on this.
I got Michigan. I think losing out on the 5-star player who went to the G League, and then plus the guys they're losing. We mentioned them earlier. I just think that they really are going to have a ton of turnover. They've got transfers, all that, some incoming freshmen. There's a lot of turnover on that team.
Coach?
I don't want to bring it back, but I'm going to say Purdue because of losing the two players, the two seniors. But Michigan's right there as well.
Yeah, I'm going to side with Ryan here with Michigan. I think losing a 5-star guy is a really difficult one to replace. They had some other decent recruits coming in, but there's no logical replacement for him, and you're already looking to replace the leadership of Simpson and the defense of both he and Teskey, and then losing to Julius hurts you a little bit on offense. So I'll say Michigan as well. Next question. Joel touched on this, and I think we talked about it before. So it was basically a coach is being hypocritical, talking about players facing adversity, looking for a way out, then turning around and welcoming a transfer player. I do think we touched on that a little bit there. From JD, last year and potentially this year, IU won't fill one of its scholarships even if Lander comes. Is this a normal thing for college programs to do? If you're going to do that, why wouldn't you give that scholarship to a senior walk-on, prevent you from recruiting, but you'd have the scholarship for the next year? Ryan, quick thoughts on kind of how to handle that situation.
A lot of teams, if they're in that position, will leave a scholarship open. I think they'll say they'll keep it open if there's not a direct need. They won't go fill it, or they'll wait for maybe a spring recruit who drops out of something. It's like a contingency, and then they can maybe go after them, or they'll wait for a transfer that really fits. Indiana has done that a couple times under Archie. And as far as giving it to a senior walk-on, I agree that they should do that. The problem is sometimes it's, why would you give it to one walk-on, not another? It's a tough decision to make for a coach. So, but I agree. I think they should do that if they have an open scholarship. Give it to a walk-on. That's it. We're done. No more questions.
Good timing. We spent too much time on Purdue, but we did go well otherwise with timing out the show. So with that, that'll do it for this week's episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. And don't forget to go to assemblycall.com or text IU to 66866 to join our free email newsletter. Special thanks to Bob Thompson for producing most of the music you hear on the show, and thank you for listening. We'll talk to you again next Thursday night.
Take it from me, Yogi Ferrell. Keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
Thank everybody for coming out.
All right, I got to get out of here, folks. Thank you.
Was on a Zoom call with Archie Miller before he was here. That sounds like something we would make up on the show, which actually in this case is true. And it was related to the fantasy camp, but you were mentioning a couple things in the chat about that you took away from that. So I don't know if you want to share those. I can also start recording again if you want to be able to tack these on or
no
or not.
I mean, I'm recording because I can tack it on. I'm gonna respect the sanctity of that venue actually, because I don't know. There was definitely some stuff said there that was requested to keep on there, and I'm gonna respect that. And he didn't. It was funny because the hysterics guys were on there, so he even said something like,
"Are they
all
both
right,
going?"
Yeah, they're both going. He's like, all right, you guys, let's keep this confidential. He doesn't know who I am.
Nice.
So I was like, okay, but no, no, there is some stuff, and it would be interesting, and I never one with our audience that if I know something I will keep it, but in this case it was specifically requested, so I'm gonna respect
all right. Well, I'm
that.
sorry that I set you up to look like you're withholding things.
It's not.
from
I mean,
everyone.
this is not like deep dark secrets or anything. It would be like mildly interesting, but I'm just not. I don't want to do that. Not that it would get out or anything, but
we're on day 60 or whatever it is of this. Everything is mildly interesting at this point.
No.
Hey, did you guys read my email that I sent to you? What I found interesting?
Yeah, I mean, do you see what this is doing to Coach? I mean, put it on the scale of what he sent to us, and put as if that's that might be mildly interesting. So who knows? Anyway, no, I'm just joking.
Yeah, no, I don't.
So what are the plans for the camp at this point? Are they just kind of playing it by ear for another little while and?
Yeah, basically. I mean, they're going to try and do it as planned. That's their goal. They've got a couple backup dates for it. But I think a lot of it will depend on what the status of campus is at that time. Do we see some kind of, a second wave or whatever as it gets toward the fall? Who knows? I mean, it feels like there's just an ocean of time between now and then. So we'll just have to see. But that's their plan.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
By the way, it had nothing to do with recruiting. So it was definitely not recruiting stuff that was talked about on the call. Just to clear that up.
All right.
What?
Good deal.
Anyway.
Are you withholding from us or just the audience? I think you're withholding from us.
No, I put some stuff in the chat to you
I'm
guys.
kidding. I saw it.
Okay. Yeah. Again, nothing. That's not earth shattering.
So a little thing, putting these clips together for Coach's Corner, there was some good play. I know it was 20 and 12, whatever, and it wasn't consistent play and too much up and down. Like when things went bad, then we give up a 20-2 run and the game gets out of hand at Maryland and that. But I don't recall that. Yeah, individual players, there are some things that if they're working on their game now on their own, and a few of those questions we addressed last week are answered, then you got to feel pretty good about Indiana making some improvement to move up in the Big Ten. But you can't have a good game against Michigan State, then 2 bad games in a row if you're a major participant in the lineup, and that happened too much last year. But I just came away. Maybe I'm starving for sports, but it's been fun going back over that and watching some of the guys. And I'm very excited about the freshmen coming in. I just think we have depth of the guys that want to work hard. And from our discussion about Purdue, that's kind of what brings it to an IU thing. You look like you got 12 guys that really want to work hard, find their role, find their niche, and get it done. And hopefully 2 seniors who really want to, make a good run their senior year. I'm starting to feel a little bit better.
Yeah, I think that this
I felt better looking through the Big Ten stuff today. Just really looking at who other people lost and different things like that. I had saved the podcast on the brink, so I kind of did a little bit of research before and then listened to that. So it was I don't know. I think we're all probably trying not to get too optimistic because we've shot ourselves in the foot however many years in a row by doing that. But
we also don't know how everyone's going to react to this. Like, are guys going to be working hard at home? Working out. I mean, you don't know how improved they are. You can assume improvement from guys. And if you look at it, you assume that certain guys on the team are going to get better one year to the next. we really don't know. We're just guessing. I mean, we don't know until they hit campus, until they get in some games, how it really is going to turn out. But I think that the additions of guys like Leal and I like Geronimo too, but Leal and Galloway specifically, who know what, from following the program like they have and having friends in the program, they know what it's going to be like when they get here. So they know they're going to have to adjust quick and be ready to hit the ground running. I'm sure Geronimo does too, but we just know for a fact that Leal and Galloway know what this program's about just from seeing it and having friends on the team. So I think they're going to be positive additions for sure. I think Geronimo will be too, but I don't know how long it's going to take him to adjust to it. Those other two guys know what they're getting into. And then also, just assuming that the continuity. I mean, you go through the Big Ten and how many guys are leaving or transferring or how many new guys are having to come in and take big roles. Indiana doesn't have that. Indiana's basically just moving everybody up one spot and moving on. And it's a lot of guys who've been in the system. So
Jeff in the chat says something that's really key too, Ryan. And guys, is the alpha. Who's the alpha for IU? Who's the closer?
I think we all know who we'd want it to be.
Who's that guy that can just go get buckets at a late shot clock or late game situation to win 2 or 3 games, to win that Maryland game, to win, some of those games that were really close that didn't turn out to Wisconsin game, whatever. Developing that would be really, really, really good for the Hoosiers.
In a year, I think it's Lander, but right now, I think we'd all love it to be Rob Finney to either get it or find somebody with his ability. Be able to break down a defense and find an open guy for the bucket when you need it. Obviously, Trace Jackson-Davis is going to be the guy you feed, no matter what. But if you're talking about a guy from the perimeter trying to get the ball,
you might be running to play for Al Durham if you're smart, based on what he did over the last month.
It could be Al Durham. I think you would love it to be your point guard, to be the guy who can go get a bucket or find a bucket. But yeah, it could be Al Durham. For sure, it could be. And he showed at the end of last year he's capable of it.
We did that episode about biggest question marks, and we didn't include Justin and Al as question marks because they're seniors. You kind of know what you're going to get from them. I will say I am feeling a lot better about those guys. Not that I was feeling bad about them at the end of the season, but there were clearly ups and downs for them last season. But I really think that they will come in with a really good approach. And I think it's interesting because you're seeing a lot of guys, even older guys, like a Harms, like an Eastern, that have had up and down careers that, you get away from the team and from the message of the coach and your teammates and some of that stuff. And maybe that didn't enter into the decision. Maybe it did. We've seen other guys transfer too. And I think it's easy for guys to make that decision. And, Al and Justin are playing for the coach that didn't recruit them. They've had ups and downs with fits in the offense, all of that stuff. And you kind of wonder how are they going to approach their senior season. From everything I've heard, it's really positive, really, really positive, which I think, we didn't list it as a question mark, but I think it is because your seniors buying in and setting a good example every game is really important. And I wondered about that, and I wonder a lot less about it now, which makes me feel really good.
Does Justin want to play the 3 so he can show what he's doing, or would he be better off at the 4 where he can exploit some things? Does that depend on his, turnout or his attitude, whatever, for his senior year? Is he better with IU and personally at the 4, or is he better playing the 3? Because I like him at the 4 because of his lack of shooting, and you need more shooting on.
Look, based
where Archie's headed with that.
We all know, based on what we've seen, Justin operates best offensively when he's getting out in transition, getting offensive rebounds, and cutting. And getting the ball on the move, going toward the basket. When he's dribbling toward the basket, when he's a spot-up shooter, we have 3 years of evidence that it's just not good. And whether that's because he doesn't have the confidence, because his skill level isn't there, I'm sure there's a lot of reasons why it is. We just know watching games what it is. So unless there's a drastic change in skill or confidence, I think he's going to function better as a 4. Now I'm sure he wants to prove that he can be that, that wing guy, that, 3-and-D type who can make outside shots because he's going to become a much more attractive NBA option at that point. But I think, I think the legacy that he leaves at IU is also important to him, and so, I think that's going to matter. I think it's going to matter to Al. And so I think that's what you hope. I feel like seniors can go a couple different ways. It's like, hey, this is my last chance to showcase what I can do, or here's my chance to leave a legacy and do the best thing for the team. And obviously you hope it's the latter. And from from what I've heard, that's their approach that they're taking with it.
He's our best defender. Is he better defending a 3 or better defending a 4?
3 probably because of his length, I would think. But
that plays into too. If you think he's your better defender,
especially given the other options
other people play though. I mean, he played well against Lamar Stevens, but Penn State kind of played him at the 4. So it's like
it's more matchup dependent with him. I think we can agree on that. But I also think that his ability as a defender at the 4 isn't that far above the other defenders who can play at the 4. But at the 3, I think it is.
Right.
Like Race Thompson could probably fill in defending a 4 pretty well. Maybe not as good as Justin, but you don't lose as much. And then you could slide Justin over to the 3. So I think it's just going to have to be matchup dependent, really.
He's also the one guy on defense that is in the right place almost all the time. Now, he's not always going there hard. Like he doesn't always hustle where he's supposed to be, but he's in the right place. And for a defense that requires a lot of cohesion and it feels like the program is still learning it, that would be really hard to replace, and so I think there's going to be some value in that, which isn't always going to jump out in the box score, and maybe we won't always mention it on a post-game show, but it's certainly something that the coaches noticed because that's why he gets so many minutes.
He's very talented when he plays focused and lasered in. I don't think that's ever been a question for a lot of us, is his ability to go get rebounds and deflect the ball, steal, and do all those things. It's just been there, maybe a possession here or hanging ahead, not getting back on defense, like you said, not getting there fast. And it's that consistency thing that really has me excited. It's like when you grow older, you get better. And when it's your last run, you have a little more sense of urgency. And if Al and Justin have a little bit more sense of urgency to lift their game just that much, I think that brings more consistent play from those two. And that's going to be, then you got the experience factor. It could be special. So,
Coach, you're right. Here's all I'm going to say about that. I am not expecting quantum leaps from those guys.
No.
Because we were saying the exact same stuff about Devontae, and he was essentially the same guy as a senior.
True.
That he had been.
Possibly. Maybe I should add possibly.
Yeah.
There. That last year could possibly make a difference in some people evening out their play.
Yeah.
Because if he evens out his play, he's really, really good.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really hope that what we saw from Al offensively, both in terms of just his approach and the way the team was using him, because he's a guy who needs offense run for him, to get shots and get in the right position. And I think he showed that he can be effective doing that. So if he can do that and Justin can be an anchor on defense, I think that's going to go a long way toward letting the other younger guys kind of fill in around them. That was my whole point. I feel better about it now than I did 6 weeks ago.
Can Hunter score off the bounce? Can he be a drive guy? That's something I'd love to watch workouts, or I'd love to see practice to see how he can. We know he can shoot. We know he can post up a little bit. Can he score off the bounce? Because I think maybe L's that guy off the bounce. Obviously your point guard's off the bounce, but we need someone to shoot consistently. We need someone to go get fouled and be a driver. And we obviously have the post play that we're pretty happy with. But that drive guy, that bounce guy, is someone that we need as well. I just wondered if Hunter has that capability.
I think that's especially if he can continue to shoot it well enough, he can attack closeouts and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that's what
I think that's Hunter's next step.
Yeah. I mean, that's what that rewatch series like. Just, I mean, the guys who were really good, the ability to shot fake and do whatever. Not to sound like a super old man after I just defended, Purdue coach bashing players or whatever. But yeah, I mean, just watching.
How were the bounce passes, Andy?
How many they're amazing. But yeah, I mean, how many of those guys got baskets and created drives to the basket just off of a ability to get a guy in the air and off balance because they were proven shooters as opposed to just the conversations we had about Xavier Simpson and Eastern and whatever, where everybody's just like, I'll just hang out here and watch you attempt to shoot and go from there. So
it's confidence and health with him. Those are going to be that's the thing. Yep. So I think he's the guy who could take a major leap. Because you think about the talent, and then he was actually off for a year. So, I mean, he's coming in last year, his first year in major college basketball, plus he'd been off a year, plus he's dealing with health stuff. Like, if two of those three things are a lot better, like, he's the one guy that I think could take a major leap and would be he and Rob. And it could be a huge, boon for this team. I think Brian froze.
Either that or he's just contemplating deeply his response.
Mm-hmm. Could be. Who's to say?
I was going to bring something up. I don't know that I want to open up this can of worms right now.
All right. Well, we've been on for an hour and a half, so maybe
I know. That's why.
You've only been on 30 minutes.
If you have to think about it, then you probably should.
Nah, it's something that we've talked about before. Maybe we'll talk about it on a future show. I was going to ask Coach just the whole.
Yeah, I'm sure we need plenty of ideas for future shows. So just
the whole referring to players as kids thing, and I've talked about it before. And I think it goes into the whole Painter discussion. I don't want to get back into that, but are we overprotective of?
Well, with Ryan frozen, this
kids?
is the perfect time to get back into that discussion. But
anyway, we're not going to bring it up now. But it's
quick answer. I get your point that college guys should be called men. And they should be able to handle criticism. The question for me, Jerod, is public versus private. There's some coaches out there, like Mick Cronin is nasty towards his kids in practice. I mean, the language and all of that, and yet he gets stuff done. And some people would disagree with that kind of coaching, that berating kind of coaching. But Mick Cronin gets it done. So when you've been in college coaching practices, you see a wide variety. And people can disagree on that as well. To me, as an educator, it's yes, they're still 19, 18, 19, 20, 21. I don't consider them kids. I consider them young men. And to some extent, even the pros. The pros get a little bit, upset when their manager goes public instead of going private. And maybe if you had the private conversation and then went public, I could be okay with that as well. But if I'm pushing a program to be the best man you can be, we're in it together, those types of things, I got to be able to demonstrate that as the leader, that I can handle adversity as well. And that's just a philosophical thing. When we won, it was always the kids' credit or the players' credit in high school. When we lost, it was my game plan and all those things, even though I didn't believe that. And a lot of people criticize me locally because you're setting yourself up to blame if you take you said this and that, but I just believe my role as a leader is to take that all on myself and not to push it off. And that's kind of where it comes. I have a lot of respect for all the coaches and really the media aspect of Delphi bracketology. Some coaches that I didn't like, I now like Underwood at Illinois. When you get in there and watch them and see how they talk and see how they respond and their players, their men are their guys, that's just huge. And I think Painter does a great job of that. But I just take it real. That's where I come from. And I know it was refreshing for me to hear that honesty as a fan and as a coach, because we all get frustrated. But I think as a leader, you got to protect your brand and you got to protect what's going on. And there's a time and a place. And that's just where my position come from. What he said was spot on. There was not an untrue thing. There's not a thing that I disagree with he said. And even the Boilermaker part of it, I get it. You're not a Hoosier. You know me. I can't get into a Noah Vonleh and Eric Gordon as much as former Hoosiers as I can, guys who stayed at least 2 or 3 years, and I got to see him multiple years. That's just the kind of guy that I am. But I think he just, yes, they are young men, and they're not kids, and you don't need to coddle them in practice. And but publicly, for me, is a different. I take that way in media too. We used to do a post-game high school show, and we tried to stay positive because they were high school players. And when the show changed hands and some different people came in, parents would call in and complain about the coach, and they would allow that. And that's just not me. If that makes me soft, I'm glad I'll be a snowflake.
No, you do make some really good points, Coach. And I mean, I generally buy into a lot of that, but it just
I think Painter got screwed. I think Matt Painter and the Purdue program got screwed by 2 kids who were being selfish. That's my honest feeling. And so what he said is not. But I've also made huge mistakes as a coach when I was heated or right after a game, saying things that, boy, when it came out in the paper, oh my gosh, did I really say that? That ended up on locker rooms somewhere else, even in high school. It ended up in the locker room. So the mouth of a coach can get you in trouble right after certain things happen. And again, that's, I guess, where my point is. No, I put this solely on Harms and Nogel chasing dreams that aren't there. And it would frustrate me as a coach. we had some kids leave our program in the last couple of years at Western that we were really counting on, and it's frustrating because we would really like to count on them, but we didn't chase them. We didn't say anything negative, and I will never say anything negative because they're good people. We just disagreed with their decision.
Yeah. Fair enough. Ryan said his power went out.
It's completely ridiculous.
There you are. Anyway, all right.
It is.
Madeline pulled the plug, someone said.
Yeah, maybe.
It's time for dinner.
That might
it's
be.
time for dinner.
All right, cool. Well, Jerod, you got the files already. I made the mistake of I stopped recording at the end of the first segment instead of hitting pause, so then I just did that for all of them. So there's 3 files out there, but they're labeled which one's what segment. So
okay, cool. Thank you.
Good to piece together. Yeah, hey, no problem.
Thank you. All right.
All right. Very good. We'll chat next week then.
Yes, we will.
Sounds good.
Hopefully something happens that we have to talk about.
No kidding.
You know what the last 48 hours have taught me? We need some damn games to talk about. Like I think I just like needed something to get like worked up about, to like get into.
Yeah.
We need some games here. Yeah. I don't know. Next week's topic, at some point,
German soccer talk on next week's.
Yeah.
It's going to be exciting.
At some point, we got to start doing our
players.
play-by-player series. So, by the way, I reached out to Indiana to try and see if we could get some players on, or if I could talk to some of them for background. No, I don't understand why we don't make our players more available. Did you see what Michigan State was doing? They had Marble answering like all these questions, like just silly stuff. Come on.
Yeah, if you don't want them to answer, certain types of questions or like whatever, but yeah.
Yeah, you can curate the questions, but just, give us something in the player's own words. I don't.
Yeah. Yeah, we should do that this week. We should send something around, kind of do it if there's any logical order in which we want to talk through guys or something like that. I feel like we kind of bounced around last year.
Jerod, is that just a basketball issue or is that an Indiana athletics issue? Because I've always heard that Indiana athletics is a lot tighter than a lot of other places in access and media.
I don't pay a ton of it. Like I honestly don't pay a lot of attention to what happens with the other sports, so other people can probably answer that better than me. But it's certainly been like that. Look, the head coach is not exactly the most media friendly guy. Like he just doesn't really like dealing with the media, and I don't know if he fully understands the value that you can get from it. He sees a lot of the negatives. So, I don't think you're getting any, help from Archie in that regard. But, I don't feel like JD's handling it a lot differently now than he did under Crean. It's just, it's a philosophical difference. And I guess I see the one side of it where it's like you kind of protect the narrative, you prevent guys from saying something maybe they don't want to say, yada, yada. But, this is one of the hills that I will die on, just like 2 fouls and all the other stuff. Like, if you're going to prepare players, prepare them to deal with the media. Like, this is what college should be about. So and it's just good to let the fans get to know your players, because the more you know them as people, the more of a benefit of the doubt you're going to give them. Like, it just,
Do you think requests, the number of, if you open it up, the number of requests being such a top-notch program that, our show wants them, there's this podcast, there's that.
That's why you have an SID to say no and be the gatekeeper.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
No.
I'm just trying to figure out why. Because I've heard a lot of media people that I've talked to have always had difficulty with access. And I don't think it's a basketball thing. I think it's an Indiana University. As much as, I had great stuff today with the ticket guy called, there's a lot that I'm proud of with Indiana and Indiana athletics, but I too don't understand how the access, it can promote itself, I guess. But if you want to sell football tickets, there's more ways than just putting a bouncing pizza in the section 12 or something. Come on. And now maybe I see that more because I'm now part of the media. But and I'll tell you, as coaches, we don't like the media. They come in your locker room after you lose to a team, and you respect them because they have a job to do and they're doing their job. But you try to answer those questions real quick and get out, and you don't mean any disrespect. It's just not, part of what you really like to do. And I agree also that coaches miss the opportunity. If you really could use it to your advantage, could save a lot of skins too.
Who gets treated with more kid gloves in a lot of ways than Tom Izzo and Bill Self? Those guys know how to, as a coach, I feel like you do.
They also win.
Well, obviously that too, but I feel like they know how to use the media, and they are also just probably more generally gregarious guys, so I'm sure part of it just goes to what your personality is, but I don't know, from a strategic perspective, think about all the great articles that you've read, like, the article that Eddie Cotton did with Devontae Green that really humanized Devontae, and it's like, man, you know what, like, this is not just a guy who's jacking up shots. Like, this is a person with a story and a history, and like,
and you can have someone in on the interview too. Like, I always used to stand with my players when they got interviewed by the press, because high school juniors who hit the game-winning shot could say something really ridiculous, and I don't want the player to be misquoted or misused too. So you could really monitor that as an SID. If you do a Zoom call and we're recording it, you could be on there silently and you could object to something and say, please don't promote that or whatever.
I'd be fine. I'd be fine with that. Like, you make mistakes. If I go on a podcast, I would expect that if I'm like, hey, I really explained that poorly, or I didn't mean to say that it would be taken out. Right. Like, you're not trying to do gotcha journalism. It's like, let's just tell the story. We're here to be part of telling the story of IU basketball. That's what all of us are doing, So, I don't know. I don't get it, but whatever.
I know the Hoosier Heartland guys, like, they've had on some players from other sports and different things like that, but I think, obviously, IU basketball is different than a lot of the others, but I don't think it's a department-wide policy.
Have they had players or just coaches?
I thought they've had some players recently.
There was a softball player that was on there recently.
I thought it was softball recently.
Was she graduate, though?
I don't
some
know.
of the smaller sports.
Coach, stop asking questions I can't answer. I have no idea. I just know.
Hey, I'm done with remote learning. My teaching job's over right now for a couple months. I got to ask questions.
Now he's into gotcha journalism because he's trying to catch me knowing whether it's a current player or not. Well, I have no idea, but I'm going to try to look and see if I can figure it out. But I know even like the Hoosier Network guys, like, they've had players on before at various points. I know it's a little bit different in student media. Maybe there's just different access that they might be able to just inherently have by being around. But anyway, yeah, I don't.
You would think that, I'm biased because I like what we do, but we've earned our stripes here, that we're not some podunk person opening up, a podcast. They've watched us and they know who we are, because I know that in the athletic department, they assign people to watch all these things. So you would think that we've earned our stripes a little bit, as opposed to someone just starting up or,
yeah. All right.
Well,
dare to dream.
Dare to dream.
Hey, I got a haircut today, fellas.
Did you?
Yep.
I need to get a haircut.
Everyone's dying for a haircut. I just
looks nice.
got the razor out, and
I'm due for another one. I'm due for another one this weekend here at home. So,
by the way, these guys are saying, Izzo is brutal after a loss. He's a grumpy old man. He is. He'll also sit with Brendan Quinn for 3 hours, and then Brendan Quinn can write a great piece. And you hear when Brendan talks, and Brendan is really objective, and I like him, obviously, and I respect what he says. But you can tell when he talks, there's an objectivity, but there's also an affection for Izzo because of time he spent with him, and an ability to triangulate Izzo as a human being and not a two-dimensional character. And that, that's what makes those guys interesting to read. And we just don't, we don't quite. And maybe you get that more at a program like Michigan State that's more established and there's a little bit more comfort level with it. And you can do that when you're Izzo because, you're not going anywhere. But I hope that's what Indiana gets to one of these days, because I feel like it would just be, we love this program. It would be more to embrace, more to hug, Anyway.
Agreed. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Hopefully we evened out the Purdue talk by getting into some other topics later. So did our best. We didn't talk about Purdue that much on the actual show. It was really just the in-between. We talked about at the end of the first segment. We really didn't touch on them at all in the Big Ten part. So
we only made our most loyal listeners suffer through Purdue talk.
Yes.
Nice.
That's
really, really good of us.
It's just.
We're just testing.
Is that not how you're supposed to do it? I just wasn't sure.
Yeah,
I actually
next week they've survived.
I find it uninteresting as a Purdue story. I find it interesting as a way to talk about the larger topic, and which is hard because, as I said, the context matters. So you do have to talk about the details. But I think it's interesting trying to project if that, would you want your coach talking like that? I don't know.
All right. Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Right. See y'all. We'll see you next week.
All right.
See you in the community.
Peace.
All right. Later.